Okay. I, so I was, I mean, of course, we've had, this is, I think, my third class or my third lecture. Uh, 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 okay. Uh, uh, what we are doing is offering some initial clarifications, right? But even before I began to offer those initial clarifications, I also set up certain kinds of backdrops in which we have to receive any set of clarifications that we offer initially, right? Etc. Okay. But more importantly, it is important. It is necessary to address some of these initial clarifications that I am offering, right? About modernity, modernization, modern, and so on, right? In the last class, I moved on to this set of clarifications. But I think there were a lot of interruptions, uh, technical interruptions during that class. And I'm not so sure the recordings were uh, uh, were sufficiently robust. So what I plan to do is to just quickly rehearse some of the steps that I initiated in the last class, especially on the clarifications front. I mean, clarifying the terms modernity, modernization, modern, and so on, right? And I think it's important to get a sense of the. I mean, there is a certain linear progression in my remarks that I made as initial clarification about these terms. If you recall, and I'm rehearsing those steps now, I started with a quotation from Descartes, okay, which which in a manner of speaking expresses a sense of resolution, okay, about not taking anything for granted, right? Ridding oneself of all opinions, right? And to address things afresh, right? So as to establish a certain firm foundation in our structures of knowledge. I mean, that's what broadly the gist of that quote, right? Etc. And I made the point that the sense of resolve that Descartes is expressing there, which is from his discourse on method, right, is as good an expression as any about the process of becoming modern, right? I mean, that in the process of becoming modern, what you are aiming at is certainty, right? Ridding oneself of all opinion, superstition, etc. Okay, and trying to lay our understanding, our engagement with the world on some secure foundation. Of course, there are many other ways in which this process of becoming modern can be expressed. Okay, but I think that quotation from Descartes that I began with is as good as any as an expression of the process of becoming modern, right? Okay, so what we understand as modernity or the process of becoming modern, okay, remains an interesting concept, right? Okay, I mean, both problematic, okay, I mean, both problematically complex, and also, at the extreme end, at the other extreme end, one may read a lot of inconsistencies into it, right? So this word modernity or the process of becoming modern, remains problematical in either or of these ways, right? etc. Okay. Now, nevertheless, I try to point out that that even after people have critiqued what is called the classical forms of modernization theory, right? Uh, which especially in the 50s and the 60s, this was an earlier generation of modernization theory. And even as a lot of social sciences moved beyond these older configurations of modernization theory, something important still remains. And I try to point out that 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 you know that there is a pervasive sense that our time, our epoch is modern, right? Modern not only in a relative sense, uh, uh, you know, uh, 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 as designating something new, relatively here and now, right? The most recent, but also in a more absolute sense, as set apart from all uh, earlier epochs in human history, and so on, right? And so consequently, if there is something distinctive, right, about uh, the modern, our epoch as modern, then there have been attempts to formulate different characterizations of modernity. And in the unit 2 of our course, I will take you through different approaches to the question of modernity, right? Uh, okay, and in fact, one of the things that I will be doing there is to tell you that there are people who express or affirm the explanatory value, right, of engaging with modernity, right? Whereas also there are scholars who kind of dispute the value of engaging in modernity. I mean, in fact, they would say that modernity is not a useful category, that we need to actually substitute modernity with a category like, say, capitalism, and so on, right? But the fact is that howsoever people may engage in characterizing modernity, right, or affirming the concept or debunking the concept, you find that ranges of scholarship has not been oblivious of the process called modernity or modernization, as indeed the word and the concept called modernity, modernization, right, etc. So I mean, that was how I started out my last lecture, and then went on to point out that modernity, I mean, of course, can be characterized in different kinds of ways, but as the quote from Descartes that I started with implies, that modernity is about change, about rational change. It's a form of rational change, right? I mean, I will later take you through the essay that I've shared with you from Weber, and I'll move to that a little later after some of these initial clarifications, etc. Right? So modernity, I mean, is most certainly indicates, uh, 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 something about change, or we might even call rational change, right? Now, 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 the cruder forms of modernization theory, especially in the 40s and the 50s, or 50s and the 60s, did speak of a three-stage development into modernity, namely from tradition to something transitional, and then culminating in modern societies, right? And often there was an equation of the concept of development with progress, and progress as synonymous with industrial societies and with modernization, and so on, right? the cruder forms of modernization theory I tried to point out for you also implied that you know that there is no change in traditional societies, okay, and that and that and that change comes to be epitomized uh, only by modern societies. Of course, this was a serious misunderstanding, and scholarship has rightly moved beyond some of those conceits, right? But I indicated, and I think this I mapped out a little more detail in the last class, was that that you know that even as these cruder forms of modernization theory were rightly dismissed for some of their conceits, etc., I think there was something interesting in what they were highlighting about change, right? I mean, that they were speaking about the pace of change, right, etc. Okay, I mean, they were actually getting at uh, at uh, the pace of change. Of course, there is a recognition that all societies change, right? But insofar as the modern is concerned, the pace of change is accelerated, right? Etc. So there was something interesting in even those older forms of modernization theory, which uh, uh, you know uh, uh, definitely problematic in their binary between tradition and modern and so on. Nevertheless, was addressing something about the question of the acceleration, right, etc. Right. Okay. And in other words, they were saying that modern societies, the pace of change is much faster and quicker, and uh, uh, because the pace of change is faster and quicker, the transformations generated technologically, socially, economically, politically, culturally, etc., right, uh, are manifold, often translating into urban forms, urbanism, industrialization, secularization, mass mobilization, democracy, and so on, right, etc. Okay. Uh, uh, of course, I mean, if you break these characteristics, attributions down, you will find that not everything that is attributed to the pace of change vis-a-vis modernity is really new, right? And I try to point out that urbanization, right? If you take one single fact of urbanization, okay, which many times is used as an index of modernity, I mean, there is nothing novel about it, because there have been in the past, uh, flourishing urban cultures as well, right? Etc. Okay. Okay. Now, uh, uh, okay. Although somebody might say, no, if you're talking about the extent of urbanization under conditions of modernity, you will find that there is something unprecedented about it, and so on. Right. Now, but I think there is a more interesting question that arises in this way, and I mean, uh, which I highlighted in the last class, uh, whether, I mean, there is also an interesting question which is raised in the engagements, especially in the light of modernization theory, allusion to the pace of change, is whether this pace of change belongs to a single system, right? Uh, 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 I mean that the space of change is a series of unlocking a lot of changes, right? Uh, uh, as indeed the question whether there is an endpoint for all this change, right? Etc. Okay, and I mean, both the teleological question, because when you are speaking about change, you're also asking about a move. I mean, if change is a movement from one state of affairs to another state of affairs, there is a teleology implied. There can be a teleology implied there, right? that all societies exist to reach that end, right, etc. So I think there is a more interesting question about not just the question of the pace of change, but also whether change amounts to a single system, right, and whether there is something teleological about it. That remains the crucial issue, right? And it is in that context that I introduced the work of Eisenstadt, and I think in the last class, I mean, I uploaded one reading from him, which I think is useful, to give you a sense of it. And I will share one or two other writings by Eisenstadt later, right? The particular piece of writing that I'm speaking from, I haven't been able to get access to it, although I'm making my efforts to get it. I had photocopied, I remember, the introduction to that book that I was speaking from, Eisenstadt's Patterns of Modernity, but unfortunately, I think I have misplaced that, and I'm still searching for it in my collection of papers and so on. But anyway, whatever I've sent for you on Monday evening as an initial statement from Eisenstadt is still useful, and I want you all to read that and keep that as the in the background, right? Now, okay. Now, okay. In fact, among among historical sociologists, it is Eisenstadt, okay, who has who has over the last, I mean, he passed away some years ago, who has over 3 to 4 decades actually sought to bring certain worldwide perspectives to bear on the state of the question about whether modernity as signifying change, right, amounts to a single system, right, emanating from one source and limited to that source, as indeed the teleology that is implied, etc. Okay, and in fact, a lot of Eisenstadt's work is to address the various historical patterns and traditions of modernity and modernization, okay, as it were, and I think a lot of his work signals a new awareness of the complexity that attaches to the change that modernity signifies, right? And I try to point out that I mean, and I'm speaking from his 2-volume work which he edited called Patterns of Modernity. The first volume is called The West. I mean, there are papers on modernity in the West, and the second volume is called Beyond West, right? This was published in the mid 80s and late 80s, right? Right. I mean, in this 2-volume work, which Eisenstadt edited, he offers a kind of a concise summary, particularly in his introduction, of the problematic of modernity. And I think something of that and of that construction of the problematic of modernity is also contained in the essay that I've shared with you in the last class, or after the end of the last class, right, from Eisenstadt. Okay, so keep that in mind, right? But more importantly, in the introduction to this book, Patterns of Modernity, as editor, Eisenstadt, calls for a reformulation, okay, of the the problematic of modernity, okay, especially in the light of what he calls as the variability in the symbolic, ideological, and institutional manifestations of modernity, okay, Okay, and in other words, while he recognizes that modernity is some kind of a civilizational impulse, this civilizational impulse that you can read into modernity has translated itself differently in different locales. Okay, that's why uh, 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 this again is also hinted at even in the note that I've shared with you, etc. I mean, what Eisenstadt encourages is to abandon all traces of teleology, right, and Eurocentrism in our view of modernity. Okay, okay, and to see it as some kind of a civilizational impulse or a civilizational dynamic, right? Not limited to the West, actually moved beyond the West, etc. So even as modernity as a dynamic, as a civilizational dynamic, takes shape in Europe or in the West, okay, I mean, it has not limited itself to that source or location. It is, nor has it retained the shape that was given by European modernity, and it has kind of mutated in different ways. Like, okay, now, okay, so in other words, there are different patterns of modernity, both in the context of the West and outside the West, right? And consequently, the question is, how do we understand these patterns of modernity and their reception in non-Western contexts? Okay, but also to understand, okay, and explain how this dynamic, which may have originated in Europe, right, has actually diffused into a more world historical movement, right? That's why in the latter volume, Beyond the West, I mean, that he edited, he gets his contributors to consistently, right, examine the validity of a single Western model of modernity, right? That's why in that second volume, there are case studies offered about Russia, about China, about Japan, about Southeast Asia, about India, the Islamic world, and so on, right? Okay, and this is where I stopped in the last class, and I kind of, I mean, today I rehearsed those steps just for your, I mean, now that we have sorted out this recording problem, perhaps, you know, it's important to, I mean, to kind of rehearse whatever we have done till now. Although, of course, we have done a lot more, but I'm rehearsing the clarifications bit, which is important, right? Now, so let us now move beyond what I have had. I mean, these were some of the. I mean, this is the linearity that underlies the progression of what I said in the last class, right? And I want to now move ahead with these remarks. Okay. Okay. Now. Okay. Now. Okay. I mean. If we have to re-examine the validity, right, of a single Western model of modernity, right, and etc., okay, clearly implies that there can be different trajectories of development, right, of socio-historical development, okay, and consequently, the whole idea of progress, of socio-economic, cultural progress, cannot be a mechanical process, right, etc. Okay, okay. In fact, Marx has a fairly problematic remark in his writing, where he says that the country, okay, that is more developed industrially, only shows to the less developed, okay, the image of its own future. And surely such a remark has to be complicated, right, etc. Okay, so surely the fact that one has to look at modernity both in the context of the West and beyond the West clearly implies that the patterns of development are uh, are uh, uh, you know much more complex than articulations of this sort are implied, right? In fact, uh, in fact, during the heydays of development, of the concept of development, and as a kind of a prelude to older forms of modernization theory, we had the famous theory of economic growth that came from Rostow, right? And what was Rostow telling us? Okay, he was arguing that societies, if they need to take off into development, if there has to be a takeoff into modernity and development, right? Okay, I mean, in fact, the metaphor of a takeoff into development or into self-sustaining growth. Okay, okay. I mean, even those suggestions, okay, need to be qualified, right? As it were, right? So somewhere some of the confidence with which the development idea came to be articulated in the 40s, right, certainly will have to be complicated, right? I mean, what we call modernity and modernization, right? Even the Western form of modernity and modernization has proved most difficult, painfully difficult, right? If not impossible, okay, to export, okay, 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 primarily, and I mean, among other reasons, because it is seen as culture specific, Western, value laden, and so on. And that's why I think there is an important question that arises in this light, right, etc. Okay, and I think the second volume of Patterns of Modernity sets this up fairly well, right? Okay, I mean, I mean, if the takeoff into modernity or into self-sustaining growth is not inevitable, right, etc. Okay, and also, I mean, if transitions into Western modernity are difficult, if not impossible, then there is something Western or culture specific about Western modernity, and why it cannot be transported elsewhere. I think it gives rise to an important question, which will loom large behind the kind of concerns that our course will try to express. And I think one can formulate this question more precisely as, can other cultures modernize without westernizing, right, etc. Okay, okay. Now, I think this is an important question that needs to be addressed, right? If Western modernity, okay, or the achievement of Western modernity, has proved difficult or impossible, right? To be exported. Okay, I mean, that it throws up this question, among other, of course, it throws up many other questions, but one of the questions that I want to highlight for our purposes as part of our initial clarification is this question of, can other cultures modernize without westernizing? So somebody might argue that if I mean, there are people who will argue that yes, modernity is something that can be conceived of outside the West as well, right? But if you want Western modernity to also make inroads into other cultures, then it is also necessary for these other cultures to westernize, etc. That's why the question is interesting. Can other cultures modernize without westernizing, right? Etc. So, and I think this, any exploration of modernity beyond the West will need to engage with this question. And I will take you through some of the case studies offered on this question presently, right? Okay. In fact, this question, can other cultures modernize, okay, without westernizing? What is the relationship between westernization, okay, and say something called as modernity and modernization, right? Okay. And if other cultures have to modernize, right, can they do so without westernizing and so on? Incidentally, in Indian sociology, right, Srinivas had actually broached this question in his essays on Sanskritization and Westernization, and argued that the channels of mobility available for lower castes, according to him, according to Srinivas, was Sanskritization, whereas the channels of mobility, okay, for the upper castes, okay, was actually westernization, right? I mean, adopting Western forms of life and so on, right? Lifestyles and so on, right? Of course, I'm not saying that theory is valid. I'm only stating situations that are being so. This question: can other cultures modernize without westernizing, or alternatively, that is it necessary that for other cultures to modernize, that they must also westernize, is an important question, right? Etc. So I think it's important to keep this in mind, this question: can other cultures modernize without westernizing, can be answered very differently. In fact, the volume that I'm speaking from, Patterns of Modernity, actually answers it very differently, right? Etc. I mean, there can be different answers given to the question, but independent of the ways in which we answer the question, or the question has been answered, I think the question is still important. I mean, why does Islam today, for instance, have these serious problems? I mean, surely Islam is as modern as any other religion, quote unquote, in its outlook. But why does it have all these misgivings about the West, right? Etc. Of course, there is a lot of geopolitics associated with it, etc. But quite apart from the geopolitics of nations and anchored in religion and outside of them, I think there is still an important question that we need to address. So I'm not saying that I'm going to offer an answer to this question, but it's an important question. And I will take you through some of the answers that have been given to this question without necessarily indicating, or conclusively giving an answer to the question. I think the question is quite important, and I think it still recurs even today. I mean, my allusion to the state of Islam, for instance, among others, is essentially about the ambivalent relationship that Islamic cultures have with modernity, and modernity especially in the form of westernization, right? Etc. Okay. So that's why this question, can other cultures modernize without westernizing, is a seriously important question. Okay. And it has been answered differently, right? In fact, among some of the answers, and I'm referring to this work, Patterns of Modernity, Volume 2, is there is an essay by the scholar Michael Confino, okay, who looks at Russia, right, and argues, and argues that uh, that uh, that that while there were parts, while there were uh, elements or constituencies in Russia which were hostile to the West, right? Okay, while there were certain parts, and even today, if you're looking at Russia, you will find that undercurrent of hostility to parts of the West. Of course, that one is only talking of one is only talking of one fragment of opinion, right? In a cultural space. In fact, Confino, in his contribution to the book Patterns of Modernity Beyond the West, actually makes this point that although there was an element of hostility to West in certain components of the Russian public culture, etc. Okay, Russia, you know, did okay did attempt a certain path to modernity, okay, which was built on, right, according to Confino, Russia was attempting to find a path to modernity, which was based on certain patterns of labor mobility, right? And so even as Russia was trying to shape itself around a modernity without urbanization, but built on, according to Confino, patterns of seasonal labor mobility, this tendency towards a path of modernity, that Russia was trying to talk about, at least during one phase of its existence, got to be crushed, according to Confino, right, by a certain naive Westernism, of Stalin, etc. Of course, again, these are facets of Russian history which I don't think we can master. But I think the point is that the question of, can other cultures modernize without Westernization, can be answered differently. Here is one attempt to answer this question, that in the history of Russia, there is a moment, there are, notwithstanding the fact that Russia did have a tendency of hostility, or fragments of opinion in Russia which had a hostility to the West, nevertheless, it was seeking, right, to modernize itself, right, and it's okay, and in articulating a path of modernity, it tried to avoid some of the Western dimensions, for instance, urbanization and so on. Okay, but then, according to Confino, the Westernism, quote, in fact, he uses those words, the Westernism of Stalin actually crushed that path, right? So according to this thesis, there is a phase in Russian history which could have facilitated a modernity, other cultures modernizing without Westernizing, but that got stalled because of other political processes that were part of Russia's history, right? Likewise, there's another analysis, which argues that there is another analysis again relating to Russia, okay, which says, okay, that that you know that that there was a constant failure in Russia, okay, to internalize, right, modern economic growth, right. So, okay, this is another analysis of the Russian, transition into modernity and so on, right. Okay, now, okay, in fact, according to another analysis, it says that that there was a failure on the part of Russia, right, to internalize what many consider the driving force of modern economic growth, right? Okay, okay. What is this driving force of modern economic growth? This analysis does not clearly imply, but I think there is a suggestion that if Russia was not able to power its way into a new modernity, as it were, it was not able to do so because it was not able to internalize the environment of flexibility and initiative, decision making, which are necessary for technological change, and so on. Okay, and that a socialist command economy in which the Russian state was implicated did not allow for, for modernization. So clearly the thesis here is that modernizing would require some form of westernization as well, right, etc., and so on. Okay, okay. Now, so please note, all these analyses are not denying that that there have not been some of these outcomes of modernity and modernization, but the suggestion is that if you're looking at the Soviet Union, Russia or Soviet Union, you're actually speaking about it lacking the dynamic mechanism that pushes modern societies forward, right, etc. So there is one level of analysis which tries to argue that with reference to the question, can other cultures modernize without westernizing? To argue that, look, somewhere along the way, modernization, requires some element of westernization, and particularly westernization in the form of some kind of an atmosphere of flexibility, initiative, decision making, which is necessary for technological change, and so on, right? So even as certain patterns of modernity and modernization are also realized in other cultures, nevertheless, the mechanism which is necessary to drive this change also requires certain Western forms of socio-cultural change, right, etc. Okay, so now this is one prognosis. Okay, so somebody can ask, what is this mechanism, okay, that pushes modern societies ahead, right? What is this? That so while other cultures, like in this case Soviet Union, is able to fashion certain edifices of modernity and modernization, nevertheless, that essential thrust, that pushes modern societies forward is still lacking, primarily because the former Soviet Union was within the socialist command economy bloc and so on. So the focus is on the mechanism which can drive other cultures into modernization, and the analysis that I've set up till now seems to argue that somewhere along the way, if other cultures have to modernize, right, or fully realize the promise of modernity and modernization, they will also have to take to certain forms of westernization, right? Okay. Now we can take. I mean, in fact, in the book, there is an example of Russia. While the example of Russia is given, there is also the example of Japan, which is considered, right? Now, okay. I mean, here, if you're looking at Japan, there is obviously a certain pattern of growth that is also built into the Japanese story, right? As it were. Okay. In fact, in the analysis which is offered in the book that I'm speaking about, there is an analysis by one Japanese scholar who speaks about the different elements of modernity. Okay. And argues okay, and clearly argues that urbanization is not a precondition for industrialization as much as a consequence of it, right? Etc. So in teasing apart the different elements of modernity, this Japanese scholar also points out that the relationship between urbanization and industrialization is not as clear cut as the theory might have it. That urbanization is actually a consequence of industrialization rather than a precondition for industrialization, and also requires a certain technological base for it to transform, right? I mean, etc. Okay. So if urbanization has to be realized as one of the consequences of modernity, then somewhere along the way, it must come in the wake of industrialization rather than being a precondition for industrialization under a particular technology. Okay. In fact, this Japanese scholar actually points out, okay, that some parts of the Western value system, not all parts of the Western value system, are necessary for this, right? And are necessary for modernization. Okay. But what the West considers as a necessary part of modernization, namely individualism, is not a necessary part in the Japanese context, right? So there are certain parts of modernization which are considered necessary if Japan also has to go through the trajectory. But Japan also sees certain other elements which are seen as necessary for modernity and modernization in the West as unnecessary in the Japanese context. I mean, for instance, the focus on individualism, right? Etc. Okay. Okay. Now, I mean, again, these are, please note, many times we associate modern societies with growing individualism, right? Etc. Okay. So somewhere along the way, westernizing, I mean, one crucial element of westernization, okay, as an element of Western modernity, would also be individualism, not just choice, free speech, decision, free, flexibility and initiative in decision making, and so on, etc. Right? Okay. Now, in fact, this Japanese scholar points out, okay, that a lot of the Western analysts are working within a Parsonian framework, right? And because they are working within a Parsonian framework, they come to stress elements of differentiation as against integration, right? So there is in fact, Parsons, in his attempt to theorize modernity, had actually argued that what characterizes modernity is it is the differentiation that is internal to it. It differentiates between spheres: the economic, the political, the cultural, the family, the space of work. They're all sought to be differentiated from each other. And the differentiation of spheres is crucial. And this Japanese scholar actually points out that a lot of Western scholarship, okay, tends to overstress, right, the function of differentiation within modernity and modernization, okay, as against the kind of integrating impulses that might be necessary. That Japanese society, according to this scholar, okay, is a case of intermediate level integration in the forms of its corporate organization, corporate cultures, and so on, right? So somewhere along the way, here is an alternative answer to the question: can other cultures modernize without westernizing, right? I mean, teasing apart the necessary relationship between elements which are seen as part of Western modernity. For instance, the idea that urbanization is a precondition for industrialization, etc., or that individualism is necessary for modernity and modernization, etc. Because according to this Japanese scholar, the Japanese story seems to tell us something different about the patterns of its modernity, right, etc. Okay. I mean, I hope you're getting the. Please note, I think there are, of course, the stories of cultural development, historical development internal to societies is a very complex story. So what we are condensing are certain patterns or certain lines of development. And I think, in fact, recently I've encountered the work of a very fascinating Japanese scholar on the genealogy of the self in Japan, and he actually, he's a sociologist, and actually tries to work out an alternative genealogy of some of the images of nationalism and self and other in Japanese cultures and so on, right? Surely there is, if you work with their internal histories, we will have to complicate the kind of summations that one is offering here, right? But I think there is still an important issue that I'm throwing up in the light of these sketchy remarks. I mean, the question, can other cultures modernize without westernizing, is a seriously interesting question. And there are different ways in which it can be explored, right, etc. Okay. And I'm only giving you a sense of the ways in which it has been explored, although not saying that these are the only ways in which it can be explored. There are other ways of exploring it, etc. But I think in any exploration, we need to be aware of the kind of choices that the scholarship has sought to be addressed. So in referring to Confino, or in referring to that other economic scholar, which I mean, there are 2 essays on Russia in that book, or this Japanese scholar, I'm only trying to kind of complicate the terms of answering the question. I think the question, I mean, it's a question that you can ask: can other cultures modernize without westernizing? Can be a question asked also in the Indian context, right? And that's why I indicated something about Srinivas, because Srinivas argued that westernization is, is some kind of a model for mobility and success, especially for the upper caste and so on. Okay, so whereas the choice of westernization is not available to the other caste, and that they have to first go through a pattern of Sanskrit. It's a problematic assumption, nevertheless, right? I mean, Sanskritization itself as a story is being thoroughly problematized in the literature. Okay, but I think that tendency for imitation that the idea of Sanskritization implies, I think does map out into certain kinds of socio-cultural dynamics which has to be addressed. So I'm just saying that the question, can other cultures modernize without westernizing, okay, irrespective of the various ways in which it has been answered or can be tackled, is an important question, right? I mean, you can work at it comparatively, and you can also work at it in terms of the internal dynamics of cultures and which are there. But before I move ahead, right, I mean, in other words, what we are saying is that there is something puzzling in the ways in which socio-cultural development under conditions of modernity, right, where particularly the conditions of modernity are not uniform, right, how the patterns of modernity begin to develop is an important question that we need to address. But before I move ahead, are there any clarifications about the ground that we have been traversing till now? I'll also work. I mean, I'm only trying to pose the question, right? And I agree that the question is a large one, but I think it's an important question uh, 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 to be addressed. I mean, while you know. I mean, it's a question that you can also trace back to the older forms of modernization theory. Although the ways in which you answer that question, can other cultures modernize without westernizing, the answers given have varied, right? And so it's interesting to see under what kind of a theoretical frame within which the answers are being developed, right, etc. Of course, this can be a research exercise in itself, and it's not an easy research exercise in itself. But nevertheless, I'm only trying to indicate for you that the question that we have tried to announce, can other cultures modernize without westernizing, can find variegated answers, right? Okay, so what is that mechanism, right? What is that mechanism which kind of pushes modern societies forward in non-Western contexts, right? I mean, so we are necessarily arguing that non-Western cultures are also modern in their own kind of ways. But what is it that pushes them into that extra levels of advantage that modernity is ostensibly seeking to deliver into, and so on, right? So you have different kinds of prognosis which are out there, and so on. Interestingly, in this volume, Patterns of Modernity Beyond the West, there are also essays which look at Islamic societies, and secular rational modernity, right, etc. Okay, in fact, as the essays in this book about this relationship between Islamic societies and modernity is concerned, there is also something puzzling in the relationship between something supposedly secular, rational modernity and Islamic societies. Okay, and there are contributions in this volume which actually explore this question, right? Again, this is a question that still is alive even today, right? I mean, I'm alluding to a work that came in the late in the mid 80s and late 80s and so on, right? Okay, I mean, there are scholars who will speak about the adaptability of Islamic law, okay, and how a lot of Islamic law is incorporating, uh, you know, uh, uh, you know, uh, Islamic law here, meaning the Sharia, can be reconciled with with commercial contracts and so on, right, etc. In fact, today there is a thriving literature on what is called as Islamic finance, etc. And I think there is, again, which is built on principles which are different, but also uh, uh, foundationally different from secular rational principles of transacting business and so on, etc. And there are interesting stories about the success and failures of Islamic finance, as it were, right? But there is often a very, I mean, at least there is supposedly a puzzling relationship between the some elements of secular rational modernity and Islamic societies and so on, right? Okay, okay. I mean, there have been studies about what are the attitudes of the mainstream in Islamic cultures, all right? Uh, okay, especially the mainstream here, referring to the middle strata of society. And I mean, in fact, in the volume there is an essay by a scholar who engages with the middle strata of Egyptian society, of Egypt, and argues and looks at what are their attitudes of this middle strata of the mainstream to tradition and modernity and so on. And there are some interesting formulations out there which are being suggested, right? Okay. Now, in other words, what one is saying is that that I think we cannot offer. I mean, this uh, uh, this puzzling. I mean, we can admit that the relationship between Islamic societies and, say, and some elements of secular rational modernity are puzzling and and interesting. It's very difficult to offer some unequivocal conclusions about this relationship between secular rational modernity and Islamic society. There is definitely a tension between the elements of a secular, quote unquote, secular rational modernity and uh, uh, and and the groundedness of Islamic cultures. But you cannot make any unequivocal conclusions can be drawn from these tensions that are there, right? Uh, okay. In fact, in fact, in fact, I mean, I think it's important to work with this understanding that okay, that I mean, that I mean, to argue that the essence of modernity, right, is incompatible with Islam, that cannot be accepted, right, etc. I mean, surely there is some compatibility between the essence of modernity and Islam. Okay, okay, okay. But nevertheless, so surely, while there is a possibility of an Islamic modernity, so to say, right, and that or that a certain Islamic modernity can actually articulate a certain essence of modernity for everybody, there is still this question, which I think is still important, and I think that makes the issue a little more problematic, is that if you begin to identify the modern with Western, right? Okay. Then once you identify the modern with Western, then the issue in the Islamic context gets even more complicated, right? Etc. So while we can accept that that the essence of modernity, I mean, I mean, it is unlikely that the essence of modernity will be incompatible with Islam. Okay, I think so. So while we must admit that possibility, the equation of modern with Western, right, obfuscates this issue in the Islamic context more than anything else. And that's why I think if you're looking at the debates that take place on this question in Turkey, I think you will get the sense of what I'm trying to indicate itself, because Turkey also occupies as an extremely strategic position from within the Islamic world into the Western world, as it were. So if you're a keen student of Turkish history, you will get a sense of what is this. I mean, that while there is nothing in modernity in Islam which is against the essence of modernity, nevertheless, this identification of modernity with the West, or the modern with the West, actually complicates the relationship both from the Western end of the equation vis-a-vis Islam, and also from the Islamic end of the equation, Islam versus the West, as it were. So I think there is, and I think the predicament of this issue, both for the West and for Islam, right, can be addressed, I think, if we take into account some of the trajectories of development in Turkey itself. No, I can't go into facets of that history, etc. But I'm just trying to point out that I mean, if you're looking at patterns of modernity outside the West, and then trying to address this question, can other cultures modernize without Westernization, right? I think there are, I mean, while there can be different answers given, etc., there is something very dynamic and peculiar when you raise this question in the Islam context, right? And I think in the Islam context, the question becomes a lot more complicated, because there is a tendency both within strands of Islamic opinion and strands of Western opinion to equate modernity with the West, right, etc. And it obfuscates the issue which is being indicated. I hope you're getting what I'm saying, but I'm just throwing up some of these questions because I think in trying to address some of these clarifications, I mean, about modernity, modernization, etc., I think there are, I mean, there are these processes that are internal to the dynamics of societies that need to be addressed, and so on. Let us look at India now, right? But before I move into India, and in fact, there is an essay in the book, Patterns of Modernity, from which I'm speaking, which is by Myron Wiener, right? Okay, and I am sure you'd have heard of Myron Wiener's writings on India. I mean, both in the context of caste, in the context of development, etc. He has some very interesting perspectives to offer on the relationship between tradition and modernity in the Indian context, and so on. Okay, but before I move into Myron Wiener, at least take on this question, and please note, I'm not saying that Myron Wiener is the take on the question. I'm not just throwing up these issues, and since I'm working off this text, namely Patterns of Modernity and the contributions there, my instances are coming from there. But I'm also trying to contemporize the question in my own lecture, and I've tried to indicate as I have in the course of this lecture. But I think it's important for me to stop here, and I want you all to respond to some of the remarks. I mean some of the issues that are being thrown up in the course of this trajectory, right? Are there questions that you have in mind? Because some of these questions, are difficult questions. Some of the issues that I'm throwing up are not easy to be answered. But the fact is that if you have to traverse this question of can other cultures modernize without westernizing, right, then you have to work with multiple comparative situations, and that's what this volume is doing precisely. Because of course you can address the question through the singularity of a socio-historical development internal to a culture, right? And give some interesting answer to the question, can other cultures modernize without westernizing, right? Etc. But once you work it comparatively, then I think an alternative dynamic also goes into the analysis. Of course, both are important. The comparative analysis is important, and also the immanent analysis of cultural development internal to cultures is also important. In fact, Weber epitomizes that. Weber's historical sociological work was both comparative and internal, in the sense that he's as much interested in the internal dynamics of the Occident as he is interested in the comparative study of Occidental and non-Occidental cultures, right? Etc. But nevertheless, I think there are certain issues that our lecture has thrown up, which I would want you all to think about. And if there are any questions, I would be glad to offer clarifications or think along with you along these lines. Are there any remarks that you want to make? Any comments? Yes, Akshay.
1 second, sir. I'll just take the text. I had the chance to read Weber, the last part of Weber's essay that you had shared. This is a little so veering away from the conversation you just had now. He talks about how Occidental the types of rationalization that had developed in the Occident. He suspect that reasons to be in the difference of heredity. The author admits that he's inclined to think in the importance of biological heredity is very great, right? So I just wanted to know if Weber is doing some kind of biological essentialism here, in which
No. I'll come to the Weber essay later. But let's be. I don't think there is any biological essentialism. In Weber's work. Although I'm not. So I will outrightly kind of set aside the inference or the question that you are raising, because I don't think it's a legitimate question to pose in the context of Weber. Of course, whether Weber was Eurocentric in being comparative, that's okay. And is there some essentialism in Weber and in the comparative analysis that he institutes? That's a separate question, right? But if it is a biological essentialism, that is definitely not, at least in evidence, in this essay of Weber. I'll come to Weber, and I will alert you to some of its dimensions, and throw up some questions which are, which I think are important. Although one is definitely not saying that Weber is the last word on these comparative questions. Yeah.
But just one more thing, he uses the word biological heredity, which I thought is very, very problematic in a lot of sense.
Okay, let me. As I said, I have read that essay so many times that this set of remarks has never hit me. But now that you have told me about it, I will read it again, and I'll get back. I'll get back to you on it later. Right?
All
That
right,
okay?
all right, yeah.
Yeah, no, I will attend to, I mean, particularly that remark about biological heredity, and whether you are right in drawing, I mean, whether there is whether the question that you have posed is adequate in that light, and you know and what is Weber getting at through that allusion. I will speak about it later. Right? Because I'm going to make some remarks on Weber, that essay that I've shared with you, but I will be doing that a little later with all this background that I've given. Anybody else? Yes, Rose.
Uh, sir, sir, we're trying to look at the different pathways towards modernization, modernity that different nations have taken. Like, in a way, this is something which we have been trying to look at the alternative ways. So, when we are trying to look at it through this question, can other cultures modernize without westernizing? And the other question, where we say, what is the mechanism that pushes non West to modernity? Isn't there an inherent Eurocentrism in those questions itself? That is my concern.
Yeah. No, I think, again, that's not a question which we can give an unequivocal answer. Again, this is, see, uh, see, I think there cannot be a conclusive answer given to that question. I mean, because, I mean, what, see, what is to be Eurocentric, right? Particularly in a context where your histories have negotiated Europe, right? So somewhere along the way, while Eurocentrism is definitely a problem, right? While it is definitely a problem and something to be avoided, how do you handle when Europe is also part of your history? Okay, I mean, would the gesture of provincializing Europe be sufficient? Right? I mean, this is something that we will have to ask. Is something that post-colonial scholars have tried to highlight, and I think that's a very important operation. That and please note, provincializing Europe is is challenging Eurocentrism, but not dismissing of the European experience, right? And that's why I think the maneuver of provincializing Europe, I mean, right, is an important maneuver, right? Whether it is sufficient, that's a different question, right? So, what is to be Euro? I mean, yes, any form. I mean, you know, I mean, any form of absolutism in thought, in theory, in practice, and Eurocentrism does formulate as some kind of a, a form of absolutism in theory, in practice, etc. That definitely is to be challenged. But how do we negotiate? How do we negotiate circumstances where Europe or claims of Europe, of the West, are also part of our story, right? Etc. So I think that's the challenge of the question. So I don't think the critique of Euros of Eurocentric perspectives is meaningless. Nobody says that, right? A critique of Eurocentrism is important, but I think there is more to be done than just critiquing Eurocentrism, right? It is this more that is involved that I am trying to indicate towards. I mean, okay, I mean, this question of more is important because, right? Because Europe or something Western has also implicated itself in the context of non-Western trajectories, right? Okay, I mean, in certain cultures, it was part of a history. Now, in the context of India, there is no way you can negotiate, right, modernity without engaging with colonial, its colonial integuments. Although there is more to modernity in India than just its colonial integuments. And I'll get into the historiographical debate later, right? So that's why your question, the way you posed it, I will say yes and no, right? And I'm not being evasive in saying that yes and no, because as I said, Eurocentrism is definitely not an option, okay? But it is more than a, if our exercises is more than a critique of Eurocentrism, then somewhere along the way, there is something else that we need to institute as analysis when you negotiate circumstances which do involve the European presence, the Western presence. I mean, there are certain facets of our history where you cannot ignore the fact that the mediation with the West was so constitutive of it, right? As it were, right? So that's why the gesture of provincializing Europe is an important. It's the gesture of provincializing Europe is not negating Europe. It's recognizing that Europe is also a part of non-European histories, right? Okay, and that when you write, even as you write non-European histories which take Europe into account, equally when you write European histories, you will have to take the non-European dimensions in mind, etc. And that's the essential thrust of a recent work that I encountered, Colonialism and Modern Social Theory, that I spoke about, I think, in one of my initial classes, and so on. But it's the question that you have asked is a lively question, and I don't think there can be a singular answer to it, Rose.
Okay, sir. I do have one more doubt, but this may sound a little stupid. Like, a comparative analysis doesn't necessarily mean that we are privileging one over the other and doing it.
Yeah. Yes. I mean, as a thumb rule of comparison, yes. But some people will say that comparison is always being instituted from one side, from some side, right? So you cannot have. I mean, can we have a comparison from some kind of an Archimedean position, right? I mean, some kind of an Archimedean position which is intermediate between all of them, right? Now, again, somebody might say, no, there is no Archimedean position possible. I mean, standpoint theory will tell us that everything is from a standpoint, right, etc. But of course, as I tried to tell you all with reference to standpoint theory, I think standpoint theory is not only telling that everything is from a standpoint, it is also saying that some standpoints yield more purchase. And that's what is a problem, right? So I think while we can formulate what you have just said about comparison as a thumb rule, actually doing comparison involves seriously difficult assumptions, right? And I think it's important that we keep those assumptions up front. I will pose this question. I'll return to this question when I engage with Weber's essay, right? And I think Weber in that essay, and just to anticipate, is not denying certain potentials in the non-West. He's rather saying that one distinctive potential, right, is lacking in the non-West, right? And that distinctive potential allows the West to accomplish things that that are part of its uniqueness, as it were, right? Of course, we can still challenge Weber for his Eurocentrism, right? But but before we launch off into a charge that somebody is being Eurocentric, I think it's important to keep that question a little more open, and not, arbitrarily foreclose it. That's all I'm saying, right? So comparison is a difficult undertaking, although comparison is you know uh, 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 is necessary and difficult. Okay, but what lessons you draw from the comparison, right, are also equally important to articulate. So as a methodology, it is easy to 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 uh, to set about doing comparison as a methodology, right? But actually doing it raises some very important questions, some of which I will touch on a little later, more forcefully in the context of Weber's essay.
Thank you, sir.
Right. Any other questions? Okay, so I think I will stop here, and hopefully I will get a copy of the recording and I'll upload it on the web, on our classroom later in the afternoon. So if there are no other questions, I'll switch off the recording.